In this video, I'm going to talk about why I've spent over $100,000 building my podcast and why I think it'd be a good investment for you as well. About 10 years ago, I took over a podcast called Social Media Church and really had to learn how to run a podcast and the hosting platforms and all the things. And I was doing some math that after 10 years, how much has this cost me? You know, when it comes to the software expense, the video editors, the audio editors, all the different things that I've spent, the website hosting, the domain. And I estimate that I've spent about $100,000 on the Social Media Church brand, and podcast is at the core of that brand over the last 10 years. And the reality is I began to question, was it worth it? Do I regret making that investment? Because not only did I spend $100,000 in all of these expenses, I also spent thousands probably of hours in doing it. And the reality is I absolutely do not regret it. I absolutely am glad that I made that investment because it is a labor of love of something that has added tremendous value to my life, to my professional career, and added a ton of value in different ways that aren't necessarily even monetizable or have the financial ROI. So I want to explain what those are in this video and why I'm glad that I have invested both the time and the money into this podcast, and why I think you should consider a similar investment in your podcast career, even if you don't yet have a podcast yet. So the first reason that I have no regrets of investing $100,000 into building the Social Media Church podcast is because it gave me a sandbox to learn it. It gave me a place to learn even how the technology works. I had to learn about the hosting. I had to learn. Welcome to the Social Media Church podcast. Welcome to the Social Media Church podcast.
Welcome back to the Social Media Church podcast.
Welcome to the Social Media Church podcast. Welcome to the Social Media Church podcast. I'm Neil Smith. I had to learn about how to set up all of the different podcast channels like Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Stitcher, and how all of the systems of podcasting worked, especially in the early days. 10 years ago, it wasn't as easy as it is now. There weren't all the tools that we have now. So I had to figure that out. I had to figure out how to capture better audio. I had to figure out even like what kind of microphones are good microphones. How can I do this easily and affordably? How do I make it easier to have guests? How do I make sure the Wi-Fi works better when I'm doing interviews? What do I do when the episode gets cut off with the internet or somebody's audio isn't good? How do we work on that? How do we improve that? And along the way, I've made a lot of mistakes. And I look back at some of the early episodes and they're not very good from a production standpoint, but every episode was an opportunity for me to develop as a podcaster, both in my interviewing, in my communication. It also was an opportunity for me to learn better production and better systems and better processes, and allowed my team to learn processes and systems and technologies. And so the opportunity just to do a podcast gave me the ability to learn podcasting, which has given me the ability to help now dozens, and probably, we've probably been involved in over 100 different podcasts that we've helped launch since building and launching this podcast. And so, yeah, it has been well worth it just from the learnings of having a podcast. That's probably the greatest value I've gotten out of building the Social Media Church podcast. The second thing that I have loved about having a podcast and why I do not regret investing $100,000 into building the Social Media Church podcast is an excuse to interview interesting people. At the end of the day, there's times where it's like I will hear about somebody, I'll do something. I think maybe most specifically that comes to mind is a friend of mine, Sean Cannell, who has Think Media, and I've wanted to interview him about YouTube and how YouTube churches. Well, it was a great excuse to have him on our podcast to let other people listen in on that conversation. I wanted to talk to a guy named DJ Soto, who I heard had started a virtual reality church. Well, instead of just calling him and saying, let's have a chat, like, let me say, emailing him and it's like, hey, I'd love to interview you for my podcast. It was a more natural excuse to have a conversation of getting to know somebody and then to share that conversation with others. And so it's given me a great excuse to talk to people that I might not otherwise have a good excuse to talk to. And so, yeah, that's been a really fun aspect of having a podcast, because very rarely do people say no to being on a podcast, because it's a really easy way for them to share their knowledge with others and to create content for their own platforms. And so, yeah, podcasts can be a win-win both for you as the interviewee and for the guest. So yeah, it's been fun having a podcast just for the excuse to talk to and interview interesting people. Third reason I absolutely don't regret building this podcast and investing in the Social Media Church podcast is because the number of conversations I've had, and it's so often I'm like, you can just email me or text me. It's at physically when I connect with people at conferences and different things. They're like, I've been listening to your podcast for years, and it was so helpful for me when we were, building our social media ministry. We were developing our online church campus, or whatever it might be. The number of times I've just heard from people of, thank you for basically being in the trenches with me, even though we weren't in conversation. We were in conversation because I was listening to you in my ears so often and through those conversations. And so the benefit this podcast has had on others without us even knowing the reality is I can see number of downloads, but I don't know who all those downloads are. And I don't know what effect they're going into place. And so it has been such an encouragement to hear from pastors who have been encouraged and challenged and ministered to through the podcast. And so just getting that insight, getting that learning of how the podcast has benefited those ministry leaders has been extremely rewarding and a worthy investment in and of itself. And the fourth and the final aspect of why I believe the podcast is worth it, and this is something I've just really started doing, and it is at the end of the day a marketing channel for my products and services that I sell, and this is something I've always been hesitant to do, and I think even as I've more recently come to a place where it's like I've invested a lot into this, I have a lot of value, and honestly I believe in the value that our companies are delivering. And so while I have perceived marketing to be icky, different things, and I really just want to do ministry, at the end of the day I want to help ministries do more ministry. So I want to talk about the things that we do at Amplify Social Media. I want to talk about the things we do at Dunham & Company. I want to talk about the website platform that we offer through Church Press. And so because of all of that and the opportunity that this platform gives me, it has been fun to learn from. It has been fun to have conversations with people. It has been really fun to hear how this podcast has helped people, but it's also a great tool for my companies to then go and let other people know, because our audience is essentially our customer base for our companies. And so if you're thinking about launching a podcast, maybe you don't need to learn about podcasting, because you can hire a company like ours to do your podcast for you, but it will give you an opportunity to interview interesting people. It will give you an opportunity to just help people, maybe that your company can't even help, but you can give advice to, and it will give you an opportunity to sell your products or services by having an audience where you can get their attention and honestly have such a significant amount of attention, because podcasts are longer than just a 30-second, social media post or even an email that somebody's only going to skim through. When you have somebody connected to your podcast, you have their pretty significant amount of attention and connection that you're building with that audience. So a podcast is incredibly valuable. And if you feel like you've missed the 8 ball on starting your podcast, I think you absolutely have not. I think the opportunity is still great and will continue to be great, but the longer you wait, the further behind you'll get. So don't wait to start your podcast. If you want some help, our team at Amplify Social Media would love to help you launch and build your podcast. You can go to amplifysocial.media, schedule a call with somebody from our team. We'd love to talk to you and see how we might be able to help you build and launch and grow your podcast to accomplish your goals. Thanks so much for watching this video. We'll talk to you again on the next episode.